The late 15th century and early 16th century marked the golden years of the age of exploration. European explorers, led by Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian sailors, challenged the dangerous waters of the oceans, venturing beyond the known world on a series of sea voyages. It became a relentless competition among European countries to claim a share in the discoveries. Fertile lands beyond the ocean were rapidly explored, redrawing the world map each year. Throughout the Middle Ages, trade with Eastern countries held great significance for the Western world. However, by the 15th century, spices such as nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves, particularly those grown in the Far East, could be traded in Europe for their weight in gold. The country controlling the trade of these products would amass great wealth. The challenge, however, was the arduous use of land routes among Mediterranean countries to reach the Far East. Trade routes for spices and silk, traveled by caravans of camels and mules, were limited, and only certain merchants operated on these routes. The exchange of spices and other trade goods, transferring hands several times in cities and points of sale, could take months to reach Europe from the Far East. Additionally, from the 15th century onward, the dominance of these land routes by the Ottoman Empire disrupted the trade activities of European states with the Far East. Advancements in navigation had reached a level that made long-distance sea voyages feasible. Thus began the era of famous explorations. Renowned explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, supported by European kings, embarked on perilous journeys, reaching the farthest corners of the world. Soon, it became evident that the world was much larger than previously believed. A vast continent beyond the Atlantic Ocean was discovered, opening up a new arena for exploration. In 1492, Portugal and Spain divided the world between themselves with the Treaty of Tordesillas. According to the agreement, Spain would possess territories discovered to the west of the line, while Portugal would claim those to the east. By 1518, based on information obtained from this treaty, Portugal had secured control over the sea route from the Indian Ocean to the Spice Islands. Spain, however, was not willing to relinquish the spice trade to the Portuguese and sought a new route. At this time, a 38-year-old Portuguese navigator, Ferdinand Magellan, presented a new proposal to the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, Charles V. The navigator adopted the Spanish version of his name, Fernando de Magallanes, after starting to work in Spain. Today, we know him as Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan was born in 1480 in the town of Sabrosa, Portugal, to a noble family. He entered the service of the Queen at an early age and, in the following years, gained expertise in navigation and wayfinding by participating in expeditions to the Indian Ocean. The proposal presented to Emperor Charles was a novel one, although the idea that the world was round had been a known fact since the 14th century, even though it had not yet been proven. If this theory was correct, a ship departing from Europe and constantly sailing westward would always reach the east. Does this idea sound familiar to you? About 25 years before Magellan's proposal, another explorer had presented the same idea to the Spaniards. This explorer, more familiar to us through his earlier story, was the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. Columbus set sail westward with the hope of reaching India, but during his planned journey, he encountered a massive continent, preventing him from reaching the Spice Islands. He died without realizing that instead of the India he believed in, there was another continent. However, this event is the subject of another video. Returning to our topic, during that time, Europeans knew that another ocean extended to the east of the Americas. One significant figure in this regard is Balboa. Landing in Panama in 1513, Balboa became the first person to witness the Pacific Ocean. However, there was something they didn't know yet: how to reach the Pacific Ocean by sea. The only way to find the answer to this question was to search for a passage by circumnavigating either the northern or southern tip of the Americas. Magellan's plan was roughly based on this quest. He aimed to circumnavigate South America, find the passage, and reach the ocean through it. Magellan's proposal was accepted by Emperor Charles V in March 1518, and he was given a fleet of 5 well-equipped ships. These ships were the best-equipped vessels of the Age of Exploration. Magellan's flagship, the Trinidad, weighed 100 tons, while the other ships, named San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago, varied in weight from 120 to 75 tons. Magellan himself was appointed as the general inspector to oversee the financial audits of the expedition, as per Emperor Charles V's request. Magellan's fleet, consisting of 5 ships and a crew of about 270, set sail from Seville on August 10, 1519, following the Guadalquivir River to the Atlantic Ocean. However, when the journey was completed, a large part of the crew would not survive. Their first stop was the Canary Islands off the coast of the Atlantic. Magellan stayed here for about 2 days, collecting essential food and supplies that the crew would need throughout the expedition. Then the ships proceeded southward, following the west coast of the African continent. The initial stage of the journey went relatively smoothly. However, as they covered some distance, they suddenly had to contend with a violent storm that appeared out of nowhere. Finally, with a favorable wind they caught in mid-November, they began moving south towards the new continent and reached Rio de Janeiro, now a settlement in Brazil, by the end of the month. They stayed here for a few days, replenishing their stocks, socializing, and allowing the crew to enjoy setting foot on land again. Additionally, they were trading simple gifts like iron bars and playing cards for fresh food from the locals. When they set sail again, they were approaching the end of November. They continued their journey southward and reached the Bay of Biodelta Plaque. Here, they might have thought they found the passage they were looking for. However, they had to turn back, experiencing the same disappointment in several bays along the continent. The New World was not providing a passage for Magellan and his fleet. It felt as if this part of the continent extended towards the end of the world. The journey in its unknown, dark waters had finally begun to disturb the crew. Many regretted embarking on this journey. When they arrived near Porto San Julian on the coast of Argentina, the crews of Concepcion, San Antonio, and Victoria's ships initiated a rebellion against Magellan. Magellan was aware of the discontent among the crew that had been brewing for some time, anticipating a possible mutiny. Cool-headed but ruthless in dealing with those who raised the rebellion flag, Magellan's loyal group of men, boarding small boats in the dark of night, captured the San Antonio and Victoria ships and executed the leaders of the rebellion. The crew of Concepcion had no choice but to submit and surrender to the inevitable. In the summer of 1520, as Magellan and his fleet departed from Porto San Julian, a few individuals who had joined the rebellion were abandoned in these desolate and unknown lands as a lesson for others. As the ships moved south, the weather became harsher. During an exploration expedition, Santiago struck a rock and, drifting in the rough sea, turned into a virtual wreck. Communication between the ships was so weak that Magellan only learned of this accident 4 months later. Although some of the crew were saved in lifeboats in the area where they took refuge, Santiago was lost. Taking advantage of the existing chaos, the crew of the time-toned ship also rendered their captains ineffective and sailed towards their homelands. By October 1520, the adventure was left with only 3 ships. However, despite all the unfavorable conditions, there would be great joy in just a few days. The bad weather persisted, but the scenery finally began to change. The dark clouds stretching across the ocean parted for a moment, revealing a wide passage opening to the east. Later, this place would be called the Strait of Magellan. Magellan himself named these lands Adelfiego, meaning land of fire. Between October 21st and November 28th, the fleet had to test many different alternative routes to cross the strait. deadly waters covered with high tides, strong currents, and seaweed seemed to come together to prevent the fleet from passing. Storms from two oceans converged here, and the scenery was breathtaking with snow-covered, massive glaciers. However, what continued to captivate the sailors' imagination was the fires rising from these mountains. Magellan named this place the Land of Fire because he attributed the source of these flames to the locals living in the region. However, they were most likely small fires resulting from lightning strikes. This place felt like the end of the world, but Magellan and his crew did not know they were on the right track, guided by the position of the stars. At the end of November, the fleet successfully left the strait behind, reaching the ocean. At the first sight, the water was so calm and serene that Magellan named it the Mar Pacifico, or the Pacific Ocean, meaning the peaceful sea. For a while, they followed the coastal strip of the continent northward. When they arrived near present-day Santiago on December 18th, they turned the helms directly to the west, heading into the unknown waters of the ocean. However, this was a big mistake. The ships did not have enough food supplies, and they had no knowledge of where to go as they lacked sea charts. What's worse, the ocean was much larger than they had thought. Antonio Pigafetta, a member of Magellan's crew, described the days spent in the Pacific in a book he wrote after returning to his country. "We continued for 3 months and 20 days without fresh food. We needed biscuit, and the worms ate the best. Having consumed all the biscuit, we ate the ox hides upon which the pieces of biscuit had been spread, and which we had used to sleep upon. The hides were now as hard as boards, because they had been in the sun during many days. The water we drank was yellow and stinking. The rats that were sold fetched 1/2 ducat apiece, and there were men who ate biscuit which had been gnawed by the rats. Of 54 hogs which had been killed, only 1 ham remained. We ate the oxen, hides and all, as well as the rats, of which a ton was found. The rats sold for 1 ducat apiece, and even then we had to get the sailors to part with some of their biscuit. Therefore, they were dying after a while. These relentless storms, hunger, thirst, and the hardships of the arduous journey of 3.5 months finally brought the ships to Guam Island. After leaving here, about a week later, Magellan and his men reached the Philippines, becoming the first Europeans to set foot on land. Their next stop was Cebu Island, and what happened here would fundamentally change the course of the journey. Magellan, the architect and admiral of the expedition, had left behind the major and arduous part of the journey. Unfortunately, he would not live to see the completion of this journey. In a small conflict they joined in Cebu Island, Magellan and many of his men died. The remaining crew, leaving this tragedy behind, continued their journey under the leadership of the second captain, Sebastián del Cano, to search for the Spice Islands. Only 2 ships and almost a ruined Victoria were left to manage, so they set Concepcion on fire, which had become nearly a wreck. After sailing for a few more days around Indonesia, with the help of local guides, they succeeded in reaching their destination. This was the Maluku Islands, known to Europeans as the Spice Islands. Trading everything they had with the local people, they obtained tons of spices, especially cloves, and stocked up on the necessary food for the return journey. However, there was a problem. Concepcion had started taking on water and could not withstand a long journey. So it was left for repairs, but shortly thereafter, it was captured by the Portuguese and its crew taken captive. The last remaining ship was Victoria, the smallest and lightest of the 5 ships, under the command of Del Cano, set sail westward in April 1522. As the coastline was under Portuguese control, they had to sail in open sea. It took 9 weeks to reach Cape of Good Hope due to storms erupting in the ocean, and the crew had to struggle with hunger once again. Upon reaching the Cape Verde Islands and replenishing fresh supplies, 21 more people lost their lives. Finally, when they docked in the port of Seville, Spain, on September 8, 1522, only 31 out of the crew of 270 were alive. The number increased to 35 when Cylinder returned to Spain years later. Magellan's expedition had cost hundreds of lives, but the results were magnificent. Indeed, Ferdinand Magellan's expedition was a crucial event in history, being the first successful circumnavigation of the globe, conclusively proving that the Earth is round. It revealed the existence of a vast ocean between America and Asia, much longer than the calculations of cartographers of that time. Moreover, with this expedition, Europeans realized that circumnavigating the world by land was not possible, only achievable by sea. As historian Lawrence Bergreen expressed, Magellan's success was the equivalent of winning the space race in the Renaissance era. This expedition made significant contributions to the development of geographical explorations and maritime technology. This important event expanded the knowledge about world geography and symbolized the end and beginning of a historical era. Magellan's expedition is considered a turning point in the history of geographical explorations.